I used to believe something was wrong with me, not in a dramatic way, just in the quiet, everyday sense that if something went wrong, it was probably my fault. And for most of my life, that assumption felt completely normal. I noticed it in small moments. If someone seemed annoyed at work, my first thought was always, did I say something wrong? If a friend didn't text back, I replayed our last conversation in my head like security footage. If a meeting felt awkward, I assumed I was the reason. It wasn't loud anxiety, it was quieter than that, more like a constant background calculation. What did I do? I worked in a small marketing office downtown. Nothing glamorous, mostly client reports, ad campaigns, spreadsheets, the kind of job where everyone sat close enough to hear each other's keyboard. My desk was across from Jake's. Jake had been there longer than me. He was good at the job, confident, quick with ideas. People liked him. I respected him, but I was always a little careful around him too. He had this way of reacting to things, subtly, not rude, just small signals. A sigh, a raised eyebrow, a pause before answering. And every time it happened, my brain did the same thing. I must have messed something up. One Tuesday morning, I sent him a campaign draft. 10 minutes later, he stood up from his desk, walked over to the coffee machine, and shook his head slightly. Not dramatically, just a quiet shake. And my stomach dropped immediately. Great, I ruined something. I didn't even know what yet, but I spent the next hour opening my email, rereading the document, checking every line. Maybe the budget numbers were wrong. Maybe the tone was off. Maybe I misunderstood the client brief. The weird part? Jake hadn't said a word. That kind of thing happened a lot. Someone looked stressed? I assumed I caused it. A meeting ended awkwardly? I assumed I said something wrong. A client sounded frustrated? I assumed I handled something badly. And the strange thing was, no one ever actually blamed me. But my brain didn't wait for confirmation. It filled in the blanks automatically. One afternoon, a few weeks later, something small happened that stuck with me. It was Friday afternoon and most people had already left. Jake and I were the last ones in the office. He was packing his bag when he suddenly sat back down and exhaled heavily. Not the usual quiet sigh. This one sounded heavier. Without thinking, I said, "Long week?" He gave a small laugh. "You have no idea." I expected the conversation to end there, but instead, he leaned back in his chair and said something surprising. "You ever feel like everything is your fault?" The question caught me off guard. I shrugged slightly. "Sometimes." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, same." That moment stayed with me longer than I expected, because it didn't feel dramatic. It was just two coworkers talking in a quiet office. But something in my thinking shifted slightly. Until that moment, I believed the voice in my head was accurate. When it said, "You caused this," I assumed it was probably right. But now I realized something uncomfortable. That voice was guessing. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things differently. A coworker looked irritated in the meeting. Normally, my brain would immediately ask, "What did I say wrong?" But this time, another thought appeared. Maybe it has nothing to do with you. One afternoon, a friend didn't reply to me for 2 days. My old pattern would have been immediate analysis. Did I say something weird? Was my joke rude? Instead, I waited. When he finally replied, he wrote, "Sorry man, work has been insane this week." That was it. Nothing mysterious, nothing personal, just life happening. The strange part wasn't realizing that sometimes things weren't my fault. The strange part was realizing how often I had been wrong. For years. My brain had been connecting dots that weren't actually connected. Someone's bad mood, a delayed response, a quiet sigh across the room. And I turned those tiny signals into stories about myself. The real turning point came a few months later. I was presenting a campaign idea in a meeting. Halfway through, one of the managers frowned slightly. Old reflex. You messed up. But this time I forced myself to pause. Instead of rushing to explain, I simply finished the presentation. After the meeting ended, the manager walked over. For a second, my chest tightened. Here it comes. But he said something unexpected. Good work on that strategy. I was just thinking about the timeline. That moment felt small, but internally it was huge because my brain had already built a completely different story, a negative one, a personal one, and it had been wrong again. I started realizing something about human psychology that I never understood before. Most people aren't thinking about you nearly as much as you think they are. They're thinking about their deadlines, their stress, their relationships, their problems, their own mistakes. And sometimes their sighs, their pauses, their frustration have absolutely nothing to do with you. For a long time, I believed I was being responsible by assuming everything was my fault. I thought it meant I cared, that I was paying attention. But slowly, I realized something different. It wasn't responsibility. It was a habit of interpretation. My brain was filling empty spaces with negative assumptions, and because those assumptions felt logical, I never questioned them. Until that quiet Friday afternoon conversation. Jake and I still work in the same office. We still have those small moments. Someone sighs, someone pauses, someone looks distracted. But now, when my brain starts forming that old sentence, "This is probably your fault," I stop for a second, and I remember something simple. I might be wrong. Because most of the time, life isn't a story about you. It's thousands of separate stories happening at the same time. People carrying their own worries, their own thoughts, their own invisible problems. And once I understood that, something inside me became quieter. Not perfect, just quieter. Now when something feels awkward, I sometimes ask myself a different question. Not what did I do wrong, but something much simpler. What if this has nothing to do with me at all? And strangely enough, that single possibility has changed the way I see almost everything.